Hi everyone, this is Melissa Bond here, or I prefer Mel. And I am really excited that I'm going to be coming to Zurich next week for the Methodenschule. And we're going to be working together for 2 whole days, um, looking at systematic reviews, digital evidence synthesis tools, and I'm going to be giving you an introduction to EPPI Reviewer as one of the possible digital evidence synthesis tools that you can use. Now, I heard back from a few of you, and it sounds like you've already got um, some key topics, some great ideas for potential reviews, and in particular, at least two of you are thinking about doing scoping reviews. So I thought what I would do is put together a pre-workshop information covering a little bit of information about different methodological approaches, information about getting your search strategy underway, or refining your search strategy if you're already in a pretty advanced place, and also talk about some resources that you might like to get access to. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because then we're going to have more time during the workshop to actually work together on your project and make sure that this is as relevant to you as possible. So what I'd like to start doing is by getting you to really think about what has happened before in the area that you're looking to do a review in. What reviews have been published? That's always where I start first. And this on the screen, this Appendix A, this screenshot is an example of previous reviews that had been looking at digital evidence synthesis tools, and was accompanying one of the reviews that I've done looking at DEST use in education. And I always start in my introduction or literature review, I always make sure that I include a section looking at previous reviews that have looked at my topic. And I really think about what search strategy they used. So, for example, what platforms and databases did they use? Did they also use snowballing strategies? So did they look in the bibliographies, or did they conduct any kind of citation searching as part of their strategy? What year did they search in? For example, here you can see this is quite old. They searched from 2000 to 2015. Whereas, more recent ones are going up to 2020 and beyond. And some don't even state what years the reviews actually covered, which isn't best practice. The other thing I like to think about is what population were they focused on? So, for example, were they just looking at primary school students and teachers, or were they thinking about higher education? Were they thinking about a particular population within higher education students? For example, postgraduate medical students. Then I like to think about what gaps they might have uncovered and what key findings they found as well. And what is it about what they found could help me to structure my own review. One of the other things I also love to do is have a look at how previous reviews have structured their whole article, but in particular their results section. And I find that helps me a lot when it comes to doing my own synthesis. So the next thing you should think about is how will your review differ from all of those that have come before, and why should we care? One of the best pieces of advice came in the form of a question from my former supervisor during my master's study was, who cares? So what? What is it about the topic that you're thinking of doing is so important that it warrants an entire review about it? And that's something that you really need to argue for in your review. The next thing you need to think about is what resources do you have in place already? Do you have sufficient time to be able to conduct this particular review using the approach you're thinking about using? Do you have enough money to support you to do that? And when I say money, I mean Do you need access to a particular type of software, and does that software require a licensing fee? If it does, do you have sufficient funds to be able to support you to do that? Do you also perhaps have funds to be able to get other researchers to help you conduct your review, or are you going to make use of perhaps your supervising committee if you're doing your PhD at the moment? So these are something you really, really need to consider when you're thinking about what type of approach you're going to use. And then the third thing you should really think about is what type of review suits your topic and your research questions, because there are so many different types of reviews that you can do. And this is something more we'll talk about on Tuesday morning. But I just wanted to focus on a few different types in particular. So systematic reviews. Now, this is often what people know the most and what they've heard about the most, the kind of gold standard systematic reviews. Generally, they're looking to synthesize the impact of something. And as part of that process, a quality appraisal or a quality assessment must be done of the primary studies that you've included in your systematic review. Really, really important that you conduct that quality appraisal and that you then don't include the results from any low or critically low studies that you have identified. So here's some example questions from a systematic review that I did looking at flipped learning. So I generally always start off with some kind of basic contextual kind of characteristic type question. So the first question was looking at, what the characteristics were of the primary study and what were the methods used in research on flipped learning and student engagement. I then wanted to look at how they had used theory to guide their research. And then, and this is what sets it apart from other types of approaches, is that I was looking at which indicators of student engagement and student disengagement were affected as a result of using the flipped learning approach. So I was synthesizing how flipped learning and the digital tools associated with flipped learning impacted student engagement. And that is what really set it apart as a systematic review, because I was synthesizing its impact. Then I also looked at what tech had been used during flipped learning research and how that was linked to engagement. So systematic reviews are slightly different from scoping reviews. Scoping reviews are more about doing some kind of sort of preliminary assessment about the breadth and the scope of available research in a particular topic. It's looking at trying to describe the nature and characteristics of it. It's looking perhaps to look at the conceptualization of a particular theory, or clarifying something that's really quite complex. Scoping reviews are generally done before a full systematic review would be considered. The great thing about scoping reviews is that quality assessment is not essential. You do not have to do a quality assessment with a scoping review. Having said that, of course, you need to go through a very systematic process still when you're undertaking one. And again, these are things that we'll be going through on a Tuesday in the workshop. Generally, a scoping review would have one overarching research question, and then it would have several sub-questions. So, for example, a scoping review that I published a couple of years ago was looking at what is the nature and scope of K-12 learning analytics research exploring student engagement. So again, the topic was student engagement, but the difference between this review and the flipped learning review was that this one wasn't assessing the impact of learning analytics on student engagement. It was looking at the publication and study characteristics, was looking at theory, it was looking at the methods and the data sources, and it was looking at how research had measured student engagement. If we had then gone a step further and synthesized the evidence of impact of learning analytics on student engagement, then it would have become questions more aimed towards a systematic review approach. Mapping review. So mapping reviews are another type of what are called big picture reviews. So as similar to scoping reviews, they're looking to map out the shape of a field or particular topic area. And again, is a review you would do in order to understand where you might need to conduct a full systematic review or conduct further primary research. And the key here is really about identifying gaps in the literature and characterizing, collating, and cataloging the evidence that you found. Again, just like with scoping reviews, mapping reviews don't require a quality assessment, which again, though, you still need to make sure that you're doing really rigorous, transparent, systematic methods, and you are reporting those methods in your write-up. So some example questions around here. Again, there's a question around theory. Again, this is a student engagement example. Here, the questions were more about which of the indicators of engagement have been shown and which indicators of student disengagement have been shown, as opposed to what is the evidence of impact. What is the most beneficial types of technology for student engagement, for boosting student engagement. It wasn't necessarily about synthesizing that evidence. It was more about synthesizing the types of indicators of engagement that were found, as well as the modes of delivery, different types of teaching approaches, and the digital tools that were employed as well. Initially, we'd hoped to do a full systematic review, but due to the scope of the project, we actually switched to a mapping review, partly so that we could reduce the amount of time it was going to take, because the quality appraisal would have taken a rather long time. We had quite a few studies in that review. So I've talked about scoping reviews and mapping reviews as two examples of what are called big picture reviews. Now, evidence and gap maps, I'm not going to talk about today, but they are also can either be a standalone type of study themselves, or we can create interactive evidence and gap maps that are hosted online that are actually part of either a scoping or a mapping review. But I won't go into more detail. We can talk about that if you like. Generally, they're found more often with mapping reviews rather than scoping reviews, but yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention them as another way that we can synthesize and identify gaps. So what do you do when you're wanting to come up with your review questions? Now, there's a couple of different frameworks that you could use, and you probably have already been looking at this yourselves. And in case you haven't, the PCOTS framework is one of them. And that helps you to identify different aspects of your investigation that you might like to have help guide both your research question construction and your inclusion-exclusion criteria. So first of all, P for population. So for example, what types of students or what types of educators or what particular population are you going to be focusing this review on? So for example, higher education students. What type of intervention are you focusing on? For example, is it a behavioral management intervention? Is it digital learning type intervention? Is it a particular tool or a particular approach? What is it that you're investigating? Is there going to be a comparison? Are you trying to compare the findings between, for example, with flipped learning, between a flipped learning approach or a blended learning approach and between traditional face-to-face instruction? Now, you don't always have to have a comparator, but that is something to consider. Outcomes. Are there specific outcomes that you're wanting to explore in your review? For example, student engagement, achievement, retention, dropout. it could be all manner of different outcomes. Is there something specific that you're really wanting to explore the impact of, or the impact on from the intervention? Timing. Now, this is really important. I did mention this briefly at the beginning. It is incredibly important that you include the date between which you're searching, between which the primary studies are included in your review. They should be specific, a specific beginning and an end date. And that should be located not only in your abstract, but in your method section as well. So that's really important. And you need to have a really good reason for why you've chosen the years that you have. You can't just pick a random number of years out of the top of a hat. So, for example, in the past, we've said we started a digital learning review in 2012 because of the introduction of the iPad. Or perhaps another example was we started searching from, I think it was 2022, because a particular law had been passed that affected in terms of disabled pre-service teachers. So we used that as the reasoning for why we were searching from 2022 onwards. Then you've got the S. Now the S stands for either setting. So for example, are you looking in a particular region for the research? So are you just going to focus on Africa, for example? Are you just focusing on a particular country or a particular set of countries, or is it worldwide? Or S can stand for study design. So you might just be thinking about perhaps you're doing a meta-ethnography where you're only going to include qualitative research design that enable you to have that rich data to synthesize. And they might just be ethnographies for that meta-ethnography. Or you might be doing a qualitative evidence synthesis that includes all types of qualitative research design. So that's something you might also like to consider. Now, generally, I will say my reviews, I generally don't tend to refine or restrict my reviews to any particular study design. So it's also really quite difficult you can include study design terms in your search string, but then you are introducing more ambiguity into potentially missing out on variations of particular study design, or if they're not even mentioned in the title or abstract, which often is the case. But that's the PCOTS framework that can help you to define your inclusion and exclusion criteria as well as your review questions. Another framework that you could use is the SPIDER framework. And this does also come from sort of the health medical field. And here we are using S for sample. So again, that's equivalent to population. So who is it that you're looking to include? The phenomenon of interest. So again, this could be interpreted as the intervention / comparator. The design. So here you're looking at study design. If there's something in particular you're wanting to restrict it to. E for evaluation. So you might also either look at that as outcomes, or you're looking at the experiences, opinions, etc. Again, that's not something I ever use. Research type, looking at methodological approach. So whether it's a qualitative, mixed methods, quantitative. Again, I don't use that particular set of search terms in any of my search strings, but it is helpful if you're wanting to consider your inclusion exclusion criteria. Right. If you haven't done this already, I've also emailed you a pre-workshop handout with some hands-on tasks, and you can choose to use the Word document or not. It's completely up to you. So using the PCOTS or the SPIDER framework to guide you, I'd really like you to come up with a review question, or 2 or 3, depending which kind of review approach you've chosen, for a topic that you'd like to research. Remember, if you're doing a scoping review, generally you should have one overarching review question and then multiple sub-questions. And make sure that the types of questions that you're asking are going to match the review approach that you've chosen to take. So if you haven't done this already, perhaps pause this video and go and have a go at doing that. If you've already got your research questions, maybe go back now and have a look, read them, and see if there's anything that you've got questions about, or perhaps there's any tweaks that you want to make to what you've already come up with. Okay, so let's talk about developing your search string. Your search string is going to combine the key concepts of your review question or questions so that you can retrieve as accurate results as possible. Now, each database and each platform actually is different. So it's always best to begin with a master list of items before you need to perhaps tweak some for various platforms so that the truncations and things work and the wildcards. It's really an important step that I've found is to identify some example primary studies that match your question exactly. So if you've already come across a study that basically you think, yeah, that is completely within the realms of what it is I'm trying to answer, this would be the perfect study for my inclusion. Have a look at the keywords that they've used in their title. Have a look at the words they've used in their abstract and use the keywords itself, the author provided keywords or the indexing keywords that the journal has provided that might be able to help you construct your search string. It's also good to decide what kind of key concepts that you've got to address the different elements of your question. And to choose, make sure that you're choosing appropriate platforms and databases to begin with. Now, I've said database and platform interchangeably. Let me give you an example. So Web of Science is a platform. The Web of Science core collection, for example, the Social Sciences Citation Index, that is a database. If we think about EBSCOhost is a platform. ERIC is a database that you can search within EBSCOhost. We're going to talk about a few different options for databases shortly. You can also use the thesaurus feature of any of these databases or platforms to help you identify synonyms of the different phrases or words that you've already got identified. So this is one of the tasks that I like to do when I'm trying to brainstorm a new search term. I like to come up with use this table, and I've included this table in your handout if you want to give you space to brainstorm these ideas, where you would put your different concepts in one concept per column. In the top box, you would identify the key concept of your review question or review question. In the free text terms, you would then brainstorm synonyms, acronyms, abbreviations. You could use Google or a thesaurus, and you could look at those words in titles and abstracts that would then be used to classify the key concept that you've come up with. So, for example, if you were going to be looking at initial teacher education, another phrase might be pre-service teacher or teachers. It might be beginning teacher. It might be novice teacher. So there are lots of different kind of phrases that describe the same thing. And you could use this space here to start coming up with those. Another key hint that I have is hopefully you've got access to the platform Web of Science. My suggestion is to do a quick search in the Web of Science using the key concepts that you've already come up with and write down any relevant author keywords or keyword plus that are located on page. So here's a screenshot of what I mean. So this is the abstract of a study that I knew was going to fit the topic that I was looking for on flipped learning. So down the bottom of the abstract, you have this keyword section. You've got author keywords. So these are the keywords that the authors have provided with their article when they submitted it. And here we have different keywords to do with their study. Now here you can see different phrase. We've got flipped classroom. Now flipped classroom is a form of flipped learning. So I would need to include both of these terms if I was wanting to conduct a study on flip learning. Keywords Plus is an extended keywording service that is either provided by the journals or by the Web of Science itself. And it kind of provides further keywords that are associated with this particular article. So have a look at those, see if any of those relate to your focus of your review and write them down. So here's an example looking at the first concept is higher education student. And then when we break that down, we're probably wanting higher education, undergraduate, postgraduate, and university as a minimum. Concept 2, if we were looking in the field of science, engineering, and technology, we might want to split those words up, and we might also want to say STEM. Or if we're searching the German language, you might want to use MINT. In terms of a geographical context, if you were going to focus it in on Africa, for example, then you would need that. You might also want to have, you might potentially want to search for different African countries. However, I would strongly recommend that you don't and that you keep your search string more open, because you can always narrow down to the countries or the particular geographical regions that you're looking for once you're screening. Then the fourth concept is mobile learning. So they were wanting to do a review looking at higher education students' experiences of mobile learning in Africa in STEM. And mobile learning can be broken down also to M-learning, and I'm sure there's lots of other different ways that we can describe that as well. And mobile devices was an example of author keywords that came up as another phrase to describe, to potentially consider in a search string that was looking at that particular topic. Here's a few example search strings. So this one was looking at a review of artificial intelligence applications in education. And we chose to include all education levels. And we also chose to include learn and student. Now, this could, these stars here indicate truncation. So basically, this means that the database will search for any words begin with learn, and they could have any ending. So this would include learner, learners, learning, learned, and so on and so forth. So we probably haven't used those since. And I don't really think it's that necessary. If you've got education terms here that really specify that you are looking for teaching and learning, or you are looking for research that's about students. So we've kind of dropped this since then. This review was published in 2019. So we did it quite a few years ago. So yeah, that's just a hot tip. You probably don't need to have something like in there. But here you can see the key concepts were artificial intelligence and education. In this particular example search string, which was for a mapping review, and the link to it is here. And the mapping review was looking at artificial intelligence applications within initial teacher education. So those were the two key concepts. And as I said before, we then had to look for all different permutations of initial teacher education. So pre-service teachers, trainee teachers, student teachers, and so on and so forth. And we combined them using the AND Boolean operator. And I think the third and final search string I've got for you as an example here is a review that we did on the experiences of school students during emergency remote teaching during the pandemic. And an example here where we actually did use a not search part of the search string. The reason we did this, now normally not a lot of librarians or information specialists like to use the not option in a search string, because sometimes you can exclude things that you would have otherwise included. But for us, there were so many different types of medical terms kept coming up that were completely irrelevant to schooling. But of course, they were coming up because of the terms of including COVID and coronavirus. So we found we absolutely had to include these terms as not terms in our search tree. What I would suggest is that if you're coming up with, if you conduct a scoping search, so you do a little initial search to begin with, and you find that you're getting lots of results in there with perhaps, for example, medical terms have nothing to do with what you're looking for, that's probably the point at which I would consider using a not operator, Boolean operator, to have the things that you're not looking for. If you've got questions about that, make sure that you bring them along next week. We can have more of a chat about it. But generally, we wouldn't include this kind of thing unless it was absolutely necessary. Right. So if you're someone who hasn't already come up with a search string, what I would like you to do is use your review question, use the concepts that you've started brainstorming, have a look, see if you can find any extra keywords, any extra author keywords, perhaps that are in platforms like the Web of Science, and come up with an initial search string. Again, I have some space in the handout that I've emailed to you where you can start coming up with or constructing the search string. You can either do it by hand if you wanted to print off that document, or you can do it on your computer, either way. If you've already got a search string, I would love for you to conduct some scoping searches within some databases and start to have a look at some of the studies that are coming up and seeing if there are any keywords or phrases that are in the title, abstract, or keywords of these studies that you think are definitely in for the review that you're wanting to do. And see if you can update your search string. Okay, let's talk about search strategy. So, first of all, you really need to decide what types of studies and data are going to help you answer your question. Are you wanting to only include empirical research, or are you going to include conceptual or theoretical types of studies? Generally, I only include empirical research, and I use conceptual pieces to help frame the introduction / literature review and potentially also to use in the discussion. Are you going to include research that has been peer reviewed only? Or are you going to include book chapters that may or may not have been peer reviewed? Are you going to include conference papers may or may not have been peer reviewed? Are you going to include other grey literature, like, for example, PhD dissertations, or perhaps reports that have been published by, for example, the OECD? These are all things that you need to start thinking about for your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Are you also going to synthesize both quantitative and qualitative data, or are you just conducting a meta-analysis where you only need quantitative data, or are you going to do a qualitative evidence synthesis with purely qualitative data? These are also questions you need to ask yourself. Now, in terms of which databases and platforms are the best to search in, I already know that some of you have identified ones that could be potentially really great for you to search in. These are both my favorite, and they've also been found in empirical studies like the one by Gusenbauer and Hadaway, that they're really great for searching in for evidence synthesis. So Web of Science, obviously, EBSCOhost is really good. For example, you can search ERIC, although with the caveat that the American government have taken out a lot of research and removed a lot of research from that. Scopus is obviously very good for educational research, like Info, less so, but still can be quite interesting, especially for more psychological approaches and questions. ProQuest is a really good platform, and there you can search databases like the Teacher Reference Centre, the British Education Index, and also ERIC is indexed in that one. You could also search journal indexes like the Science Direct, Taylor and Francis, But I find that a lot of those are actually already indexed in these major databases, so and major platforms. So it's really kind of, is it worth taking the extra time to search in them as well? I generally don't. I do also, though, I do also use different platforms to help with um, my snowball searching, so citation and bibliography searching. I like to search in Google Scholar, but I use and I should have put it in here on the slide. I'll talk to you more about it next week, but there is the freeware called Publish or Perish, freely available to download, and it helps you to search in Google Scholar by searching the API or searching Google Scholar using an API within the software. And it helps you to download a lot more results than you can actually do in the Google Scholar web page itself. I also like to use OpenAlex. OpenAlex has a huge amount of both academic literature and grey literature that it indexes. They do have their own standalone platform, but you can also use the OpenAlex search functionality within EPPI Reviewer. I know I'm also going to talk about that a bit more next week. If you haven't used the Web of Science platform before, I just sort of wanted to show you this here. That if you were going to be putting your search string in here, you would put each key concept search string as one row here, one row here, and one row here. So, for example, you might have artificial intelligence application string here, combining with initial teacher education here. Then you would need to change this field here from all fields to topic. Now, topic will search in titles, abstracts, and keywords. And so it will hit all three all at once. This will help you to refine what the platform is looking in. Because otherwise, if you leave it on all fields, then it's going to search in lots of other areas, and you might get a lot more irrelevant results coming back at you. You can also use this advanced search query builder where you can use different field tags, but I prefer to use this basic search functionality here like that. Another really important thing to think about is to maintain a record keeping log, irrespective of whether you're using a particular type of evidence synthesis software. Hang on, excuse me, I just need to cough. My apologies. Or whether you're using something like Excel or a reference management software. I do have a Word template for this. I'm more than happy to share with you so that you can start keeping that record log of every single search that you do in every single database and platform. I like to make sure that I put the data for search. I include any kind of database setting. So here you can see the databases that I searched in were the Web of Science Core Collection, and that's what they're called. This is the time span I was searching in. I did refine it by English language and by articles. You may not choose to do that. You might choose to keep it open. I always write down how many records were obtained and what my search string was. And now this TF is the shorthand within the Web of Science for that topic field tag that you're going to use. And so I keep a record of every single time that I search, and I keep it in a Word document. I also copy and paste these search strings into EPPI Reviewer and any other search information, because you can also print off an automatic record log of your search from EPPI Reviewer as well. Okay, once you've done that, you need to decide on your study inclusion exclusion criteria if you haven't already. Now, I will just say inclusion and exclusion criteria aren't mutually exclusive in the sense of just because you have a certain set of inclusion criteria doesn't mean that the exclusion criteria is the exact opposite. So you wouldn't necessarily always say, I mean, here's a prime example. AI uses within initial teacher education, and the exclusion criteria are not about the use of AI within initial teacher education. Now, that's not, I mean, it's true, that was an exclusion criteria, but it's not necessarily best practice when it comes to exclusion criteria. So here at the bottom are a lot better examples. So for example, we were including primary empirical research, but we were excluding secondary research such as meta-analyses, systematic reviews, theoretical and conceptual pieces. And so there, it wasn't that we were just saying, not primary empirical research. We were specific about what we were excluding. So too with the types of publications. So we were only including journal articles and conference papers, and we were excluding book chapters, dissertations, reports, and other grey literature. We could have also said editorials as well. So it's really important that you get quite specific with what you consider in and what you would consider out. This will also help you in the screening stages of trying to identify the studies that you're looking for. Right. Hands-on task number 3. If you haven't already, what I would like you to do is choose the databases and platforms that you think you'll search in. Now, for me, the gold standard is 4 different platforms. So that might include Web of Science, Scopus, EBSCOhost, and Ovid, which is where PsycInfo is indexed. And within that, I might have, say, 6 databases across those 4 platforms. But for me, it's really important that I try and search in different platforms because different journals index in different platforms. So choose the databases and the platforms you think you'll search in. Then I'd like you to define your inclusion/exclusion criteria. If you've got time, I'd love you to conduct an initial scoping search in the Web of Science using the search string that you've conducted. And you may have already done this from what I said for task 2. And ideally, export the results from at least the Web of Science and preferably any other databases that you're planning on using. Export them as either RIS files or text files and bring them with you to the workshop next week so that you could then use them within your choice of software, whether that's EPPI Reviewer, whether that's Rayan, Covidence, whatever it is you've chosen to use, reference management software, etc. That would be ideal. Now, if you're not ready at that stage, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to have an example review already set up with some RIS files that you can use to practice importing into EPPI Reviewer. So if you don't get here, not a problem. But if you do get the time between now and then, that would be fantastic. So just to wrap up, I have some resources for you for systematic reviews specifically. They are all hyperlinked with different things. If you don't have access to any of these, let me know and I could probably provide you with a copy, at least of most of them. The books, maybe less so, although the Systematic Reviews and Educational Research one is open access, so you can actually download that one. But yeah, so this is specific to systematic reviews. So this is some methodological resources here at the top, and then some example systematic reviews at the bottom. Not all mine, I would just say. There's a range. Then I've got some resources for scoping reviews. Again, I've got methodological resources and guidance at the top here, a mixture of different articles, checklists, and various things that you can use to help guide you. And then some example scoping reviews at the bottom, and some mapping review resources. Again, methodological, it's a really hard word to say. Methodological guidance at the top, and some example mapping reviews at the bottom. So these are things to keep in mind. Now, I'm also going to or go back to this next week when we're in the workshop. These are just things I want to keep you in for you to keep in mind. Remember that when you're conducting a review, you really need to be clear, crystal clear, and have a solid argument to answer that so what question. You need to be able to argue where the gap is, why it's important that your review is done, and how your review is going to fill that gap. You need to think about keeping the scope of your project manageable, especially if you're doing it in the context of time limited subject or module um, uh, during a dissertation, for example. Really, really important. And also that you think about the time and people that you can draw on to help you conduct this review. There's lots of different types of software that you can use to help you conduct your review efficiently and effectively. And I'm going to be sharing EPPI Reviewer with you next week, but it's not the only one. There's plenty of others, and I will be introducing them to you as well. It's really important that you start with the end in mind. This includes thinking about potential journals that you could publish in, if it is publishing in a journal that you're wanting to do, or perhaps you're thinking about publishing for your dissertation. So what does that look like? What kind of word count are you expected to reach? Really think about how you're going to communicate your findings to different stakeholders. And also, how could you use stakeholders and include stakeholders in designing your review approach as well? What kind of feedback could you get from different people? It's really, really important and crucial that you use established reporting guidelines to help you structure and report your review. This includes Prisma and all of the Prisma extensions. Now, there are specific checklists for systematic reviews, scoping reviews, living reviews, rapid reviews, for example. There is one that's being developed for mapping reviews. And I also have developed a tool myself, which is called the Quality of Evidence Synthesis Tool, or QET. And that is more for guiding you really quickly to make sure that you've kind of hit all of the key components of including different things in your review. I'll talk about that more next week, and we'll have a practice of using it with some examples. Think about adapting search strings from previous reviews. This is something that you could do as well, which I didn't explicitly mention before. If there are reviews that have been done on your topic, perhaps they're quite old now, or that there are concepts that need to be included that weren't included, you could use the concepts that are relevant to your review in your own search string, but you need to make sure that you cite where you got that from. I've already mentioned you need to search in at least 4 academic platforms, as well as conduct snowball searching. So, for example, using Google Scholar, and there's the link to Publish or Perish, as well as OpenAlex. And you can do that either in its standalone browser or with EPPI Reviewer. And finally, also really important that we adhere to open science principles. So making sure that you are writing a protocol to begin with, that you are writing out a really clear step-by-step approach or recipe. I like to think of it as a recipe, where you could give your recipe of the method, the ingredients and the method that you've used to do your review to someone else, and they would be able to replicate it exactly, or at least very similarly, almost identically to how you've done it. So making use of platforms like the OSF, Zenodo, Mendeley Data, or I have other suggestions for registering an education protocol to make sure that your search analysis and results are transparent and openly available. And obviously, once your results are there, you're able to use those particular platforms to share those. Again, I'll talk about it more next week. These are just some really important things to get you started thinking about conducting your review and making sure that it's as impactful as possible. Okay, that's all I have to talk to you today about. Hopefully that will give a really good head start, and it's saving us a little bit of time that we then don't need to perhaps go in as much detail in these initial steps about next week. If you've got any questions before Tuesday, please don't hesitate to send them to me either via email, or you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, whatever's easier for you. And otherwise, I absolutely look forward to meeting you on Tuesday. Please don't forget to bring a device, preferably a laptop, or whatever device you prefer to work with. I still love working with pen and paper in order to scribble down ideas, so maybe bring those as well. And yeah, just bring a great attitude and fantastic ideas and questions. And I look forward to meeting you. Okay, I'll talk to you then.